Welcome to Mr. Lima's modeling workshop. Strike a pose. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't be very good at that kind of modeling workshop. I'm talking about the science modeling workshop, where we actually give information about a real thing or phenomenon without it being the real thing. For example, how would you show the inside of your body when you cannot see it? In science textbooks, they do that with diagrams, like this model of the digestive system. Models is where we're going to be practicing on their current project. And they are usually full of visuals. They show how something works with pictures, symbols that can even be 3D, like the bridge that you see here. They do that a lot in museums. But they sometimes also include words to help name and explain the parts of the model. Scientists use model to represent things that are too large, too small, or hard to imagine, like a solar system, a cell, or a molecule of DNA. Models help us understand them and how they work. They also sometimes can be used to test how the things in a smaller scale before you actually build a real big thing, like a model bridge design. Architects and engineers do that a lot, even in physical or computer models. In shows like Mythbusters, they actually do a small scale trial before going to the big thing, often to see or predict what's going to happen. So good models can do that as well. This is the rubric that we're going to use to grade a project. Models are diagrams, physical replicas, mathematical representations, analogies, or computer simulations that can help us describe or even predict a phenomenon, or in other words, represent and test things. Now, we're not going to be doing too much of the testing and predicting in our project. That's more of a high school level thing, but we have to do a good job at representing it. So a 2 will be someone that doesn't do a lot of research and have a very incomplete model of the cell. Someone that scores a 3 would be someone that has a very complete model that might be missing a few things. But the key difference is they identify limitations. Your model isn't actually going to work. It's not going to be a functioning cell. So to help address that, you must acknowledge the functions of the parts that you list. That will actually help you get a 3. Without that, best you can get is a 2.5. So if you do the same thing you did for a 3, but you do it for all the required parts, you score a 4. That's the target. For a 5, you must make sure to address the limitations, do your research, require all the parts, list the functions, but also talk about how the parts relate to each other in some creative way to form the whole. So how does that look like? Well, which of these models is better, the one on the left or the one on the right? The one on the right is clearly more accurate. It has more details. It talks about specific components, helps you visualize better, and it probably talks about functions and even how the parts relate to each other. So how do you do that with a cell? Make sure it's accurate, that the parts actually look like they're supposed to look like. Include details and features, including labels and names. But more importantly, if you do that picture, you would get a 2.5. To get a 3, you have to talk about functions, because that is addressing the limitations. Describe and explain the model. And finally, if you do that for all the required parts, you get a 4. And if you include somehow how the parts relate to each other, you get a 5. If you struggle to do that within your model in a creative way, you can always do it as a table like we saw in the previous video. So how would you model your cell? Include all the parts, label the parts, be neat, be colorful, and make sure it's easy to see. Describe the parts and possibly even explain how they relate to each other. But more importantly, have fun, be creative, maybe win one of the top 3 prizes there are up for grabs. So I'm going to give it 2. If you don't have a lot of details, you have no labels, and it's very unclear, a bare minimum model of the cell. For a 3, you actually have most of the parts you're supposed to be there. Maybe it's a living complete. You have some labels and some functions. But for a 4, you have a complete model that labels everything and has descriptions of all the functions. In a 5, you even perhaps talk about the relationships between those parts. This model of the heart scores a 2.5 because even though it has a lot of labels and it looks really good, it doesn't talk about functions, so it doesn't address limitations of a model that's just visual. It helps to help you visualize how it actually works. It would be a 3 if it had that, and a 4 if it had all the required parts. So in these models of the plant cell that my students did, they look really good, but you need labels, parts, and explanations to actually get a better score than that. Remember, I'm available during office hours. Come get help if you need it. Have fun with this project, guys. See you next week.